From the very beginning, something between us felt fragile, like a thin thread stretched too tight. My fiancé's mom never said it outright, at least not at first, but there was a chill beneath her smiles, the kind that settles in the corners of a room, quiet and uninvited. I remember the small things, the sideways glances when I spoke, the way her eyes would flicker away just as I looked her way, comments disguised as jokes, laced with a softness that barely hid their sting. Not exactly wife material, she'd say once, laughing lightly, but the words landed like cold stones inside me. I wanted to brush it off, to believe it was just nerves or misunderstanding. After all, I loved my fiancé deeply, and I wanted to be part of their family. I told myself the tension was normal. Families are complicated. She just needed time. But time passed, and the distance didn't close. It grew, subtle, yet constant. There were moments when I felt like a guest, never quite welcomed, always on the edge of something I couldn't reach. I smiled through dinners where her eyes never met mine, listened to conversations that never included me, and tried to find my place in silences that stretched too long. The words, "not wife material," echoed in my mind more often than I wanted to admit. They weren't just words, they were a judgment, a label that unsettled my confidence and made me question everything I thought I was. I wrestled with doubt and hope in equal measure, hope that she might change, that someday I'd earn her respect, and doubt that I was enough for the family my fiancé cherished so much. Every interaction felt weighted with expectation and unspoken rules I could never quite learn. The warm welcome I craved was replaced by a cold distance I learned to accept quietly. The worst part was the silence that followed, the absence of warmth, the missing words, the spaces where kindness should have been. I felt unseen in a family where I desperately wanted to belong. Despite it all, I held on to the hope that love would bridge the gap, that my fiancé and I were enough to soften even the coldest edges. But the cracks were already forming, and the chill was settling deep inside me. It was in these quiet moments, the forced smiles, the uneasy silences, that I first understood the truth I was afraid to admit. Sometimes, love isn't enough to break through the walls people build. And sometimes, those walls leave you standing outside, looking in. It was a quiet afternoon when I first heard it. Voices carrying from the kitchen into the living room, where I was sitting just out of sight. My fiancé's mom was talking with her friends, the tone casual, but the words sharp and unmistakable. I stayed still, heart sinking, as I caught fragments, how she questioned my worth, my suitability, and the doubts she had quietly held all along. It was like glass, cold, transparent, and brittle, shattering the fragile image I'd clung to. Outwardly, she was the same woman who smiled politely when I arrived, who nodded during family dinners, but behind those closed doors, her disdain was raw and unfiltered, a stark contrast to the public warmth I had hoped to find. I felt the sting deep in my chest, the bitter taste of being talked about like I wasn't even there. Disbelief mingled with hurt, twisting inside me like a storm I couldn't calm. That moment was a turning point. I realized the family facade I had tried to join was fragile, and beneath it lay divisions I hadn't been prepared for. I wanted to confront her, to ask why she let her true feelings spill out in secret while maintaining a polite mask in front of me. But instead, I retreated inward, building walls around my heart to protect myself from further damage. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. It wasn't loud or explosive, just the quiet acknowledgement that the distance between us had grown too wide to cross with words alone. I wrestled with conflicting emotions, wanting to believe in a family that accepted me, while guarding against the cold reality that I might never fully belong. The contrast between her two faces, warm in public, cold behind closed doors, left me feeling more isolated than ever. I began to see our relationship not as a bond growing stronger, but as a delicate glass sculpture, beautiful from afar, but vulnerable to cracks. And I knew deep down that some fractures run so deep they can't be hidden forever. It wasn't a conversation I expected. Not that day, not in the middle of an argument that had nothing to do with my fiancé's mother. We were tangled in frustration over something small, the kind of fight that feels bigger than it should. Then, out of nowhere, he said it, the words that shattered the fragile hope I had been holding on to. "She doesn't think your wife material." The phrase hung in the air between us, sharp and cold, cutting deeper than I ever imagined. I stared, caught off guard, as the weight of it settled in my chest like a stone. I wanted to ask why, to understand what I had done wrong, but all I could do was feel the sting of betrayal and confusion swirling inside me. How long had he known? Why hadn't he said anything before? The questions crowded my mind, but no answers came. The hurt wasn't just about the words, it was the silence that preceded them. The countless moments I had spent trying to be enough without knowing I was being judged so harshly. In that moment, the hopeful endurance I'd clung to began to crack. I realized I couldn't keep pretending that things would get better if I just tried harder. The truth was raw and undeniable. I was being measured by someone who had already decided I didn't belong. I felt a mix of emotions. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was quieter than I expected. More than anything, there was a deep, aching sadness. But alongside that sadness, something else was beginning to take root. A quiet resolve. I knew then that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or family drama. It was about setting boundaries, about protecting myself from a rejection I could no longer ignore. The illusion of acceptance had been stripped away, leaving me with a choice: continue to hope for approval that might never come, or find strength in walking my own path. That day marked a shift, a turning point where I stopped waiting for someone else's validation and started listening to my own voice. It wasn't easy. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with things unsaid but understood. But beneath it all, I felt the first flicker of something powerful, the determination to claim my worth on my own terms, no matter what anyone else thought. The nights after that conversation were the longest I can remember. I'd sit by the window, watching the world outside blur through fogged-up glass, my breath leaving small clouds that quickly faded. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched on the table beside me, its bitterness matching the fog settling in my mind. I wrestled with a storm of feelings: anger, hurt, disappointment, all swirling beneath the surface. But I refused to let them consume me, knowing that reacting with drama or confrontation wouldn't bring me peace. Instead, I chose calm, a quiet strength that built slowly in the silence. I replayed the moment in my mind, not to relive the pain, but to understand what I needed to do next. How could I respond without losing myself? How could I hold my dignity when faced with such open rejection? The answer began to take shape, like the delicate outline of a plan I hadn't dared consider before. If I couldn't change her opinion, maybe I could change the way she experienced me. I pictured the wedding day, the culmination of love and promises, and a thought settled in my chest with surprising clarity. What if I invited her not as the mother of the groom, but as someone who had to work the event? What if, instead of giving her the place she expected, I quietly rewrote the script? It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about subtle, poetic justice, a quiet way to show that respect isn't owed, it's earned, and that sometimes the roles we expect others to play can be gently, firmly rearranged. I thought about how this would feel for her. The polite discomfort of being in the background, the shift from assumed authority to silent service. And yet, I also felt a surprising calm in imagining this reversal, a way to reclaim control without drama. I didn't share the idea with anyone yet. It was a secret folding itself into the quiet corners of my mind, a plan growing stronger each day. In those still nights, with the fogged window between me and the outside world, I found clarity. I understood that my worth didn't depend on her approval, nor did my happiness hinge on acceptance I might never receive. Instead, it rested in knowing who I was and choosing how to stand, steady, silent, and unshaken. The plan wasn't about confrontation. It was about presence, about showing up on my terms, with quiet confidence, letting the truth of my actions speak louder than any words ever could. And as the cold coffee cooled beside me, I felt something new, a calm resolve, ready to face whatever came next with grace and strength. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and clear, but beneath the bright sky hung a quiet tension I could feel in every breath. The house buzzed softly with preparation. Soft footsteps, whispered instructions, and the low hum of busy hands, setting the scene for what should have been the happiest day of my life. When my fiancé's mom arrived, she wore the usual carefully practiced smile, the one she'd perfected over years of family gatherings. She expected the role she had always played, the proud mother-in-law, the center of attention, the one whose opinion shaped the day. But today, everything was different. Instead of the place she anticipated, she was handed a discreet badge, a subtle mark of staff. Her eyes flickered briefly, a hesitation that didn't escape me. The delicate facade she wore began to crack in small, almost imperceptible ways, a faltering smile, a slight pause before speaking, the quick glance to me that held more questions than answers. I stood steady, calm, carrying the quiet confidence I had spent months cultivating. There was no need for confrontation or raised voices. The power shift was in the stillness between us, in the way she moved from guest to worker, from judge to observer, without a word from me. Watching her navigate the day, helping with flowers, managing guests, running errands, felt like a silent reversal of roles. The woman who had once dismissed me now found herself invisible in ways I had only imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the compassion that settled beside my satisfaction. This wasn't about punishment, it was about balance, about showing without drama that respect and place in a family can't be demanded. They're earned through kindness and acceptance. Throughout the ceremony, as friends and family smiled and shared in the joy, I noticed her watching from the edges, her presence smaller than before. I felt a calm certainty in my chest, a quiet triumph that didn't shout, but whispered, "This is my moment, my choice." The day unfolded with soft light and gentle laughter, but beneath it all was a subtle tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that things had shifted. The roles we had played for so long were no longer set in stone, and as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the celebration, I realized this was more than just a wedding day surprise. It was the turning point where I stopped being the one who waited for approval and started being the one who defined my own worth. After the wedding, the air between us changed, but it didn't clear. The smiles at family gatherings were polite, the conversations careful and measured, as if everyone was navigating an unspoken truth. Some relatives looked at me with surprise, others with quiet approval, but the space between my fiancé's mom and me remained heavy with what was left unsaid. I felt a complicated mix of relief and sadness settling inside. Relief that I had stood my ground, that I no longer felt invisible or dismissed in my own life, but sadness too, because some wounds run deeper than a day's quiet reversal. She didn't confront me or lash out. Instead, there was a subtle withdrawal, a cool distance that felt like a wall slowly being rebuilt. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, but it was just as painful. I could see in her eyes the same quiet struggle I felt, pride battling with the fading hold she had on the narrative of our relationship. For my part, I chose emotional withdrawal rather than confrontation. I realized that some battles aren't meant to be won with words or anger, but with calm boundaries and self-respect. I stopped seeking her approval and instead focused on protecting my peace. Family events became quieter spaces for me, places where I listened more and expected less. I found comfort in the small, steady things, a friend's reassuring smile, a gentle touch from my fiancé, the warmth of my own thoughts in the early morning light. The dynamic between us remained unsettled, a delicate balance of civility and distance, but I no longer felt trapped by it. I carried my boundaries like a shield, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply choose what you will no longer accept. And while the future with her remained uncertain, I felt certain about myself, about the quiet strength I had found, and the peace I was learning to hold on to. Months have passed since the wedding day, the day that quietly shifted everything. I've come to realize that the approval I once chased wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a mirror cracked by someone else's fears and judgments, not a true measure of who I am. Now I find peace in the quiet moments, morning sunlight streaming softly through the window, warming the kitchen table where I sit with my coffee, the steady presence of my fiancé's hand resting gently over mine. These simple, unspoken acts hold more meaning than any approval ever could. I've learned that relationships built on respect, honesty, and kindness matter far more than those weighed down by expectation and performance. I no longer feel the need to prove myself, to bend or break for acceptance that comes with conditions. Setting boundaries has become my quiet strength, sometimes firm, sometimes gentle, but always necessary. It's in these boundaries that I protect my heart and nurture my sense of self. And I've come to understand that strength isn't about confrontation or loud victories. It's about knowing when to stand firm, when to let go, and when to walk away with grace. This journey has taught me that true family isn't just blood or titles. It's the people who show up for you without judgment, who hold space for your authentic self. As I sit here now, bathed in soft light, I feel a calm certainty I am enough, not because anyone said so, but because I have decided it's true. And that makes all the difference.